Good evening and welcome to Real
Hey,
Talk, where every Sunday night we offer insight, education, and resources to in home caregivers and those that are affected in their world. This is the children, the parents, the caregivers, and their extended family, everybody who loves them. Our goal is to offer real life topics and learning through discussing real issues and offering real solutions. And tonight I am really excited to welcome our guest, Laura Brawley, who is a certified mediator, conflict coach, communications trainer, and positive discipline educator. And I'll tell you in a second what we're going to talk about tonight. But Laura, welcome to the show. We're glad to have you.
thank you so much for inviting me. I'm excited about this.
Yeah, me too. I've been wanting to get you on here for a while, so I'm glad we could finally arrange it. So we're going to talk tonight about kind of one aspect of the work that Laura does and discuss kind of her top tips for your job search skills and what you're going to need to really land that next great job. And we know that with everything that's gone on with the pandemic, a lot of in home caregivers, nannies, newborn care specialists, and other staff have been out of work. They've lost their jobs. They've been in difficult situations. And so I'm really excited to have Laura share with us tonight around this topic and provide you with some insight that I know you're going to find super beneficial. Before we jump into that tonight, Laura, I would love for people to hear a little bit about you. A lot of people know your name. A lot of people have seen you around. You're pretty well known for a lot of things in the nanny world, but a lot of people kind of don't know your background and how you got here. So I would love if you could share with them so they can get to know you a little better.
Sure. So I was a nanny for almost 30 years, 29 and a half years, long time. I just aged myself right from the beginning here. I grew up in the Midwest, and I started out as one of those nannies who literally was hired sight unseen and moved to the East Coast. So I mostly worked on the East Coast. I was a live-in for years and years and years. Then I moved to Seattle and worked as a live-out. So when I first started, I was in business before I became a nanny. I actually took my first nanny job as a temp thinking, oh, this will be a great thing to get me over until I get a real job. But then when I moved to my first live-in position, I realized that the industry didn't have a lot of formalization. There wasn't any support. Everybody was just sort of doing their own thing. So I started my first nanny group 6 months after I took my first job. And everything has snowballed from there. So I've done nanny groups pretty much the whole time I've been in there. I started with the A to Z nanny contract over 20 years ago because it was crazy that nobody had a contract. Then that brought me into learning more about employment law and how taxes work, and advocating for nannies has been my big things. And then forming parents to be employers. So I do a lot of different things. I have a lot of, my hands are in a lot of different cookie jars, but they all come together in the basic sense of helping parents and nannies develop successful relationships. There's so many aspects of those. So I'm involved in all of those, but that really is my core goal and my core work.
Fantastic. And that's funny. I knew that your A to Z contract had been around a while,
A long
but I
time.
didn't realize it had been 20 years. That's fantastic. And it's
Yeah.
still one of the most talked about things in terms of contracts in our industry. So
I
well
love that.
done.
Yes.
Yeah, well done. And thank you for doing that for the industry because it's so needed.
Yeah, it is.
So I want to kind of dig into our topic for tonight, and we're not going to focus so much on contracts, although we're going to touch on that a little bit. But kind of looking more, let's talk a little bit about the big picture, kind of the process of a job search, kind of how it works and what your goals are as you're working through that.
So a lot of people sort of just jump into the job search in the sense of, oh, I need a job, so I'm going to send out my resume, post something on Care, go into the Facebook groups, and they just jump right in. So there's not a right or wrong way to do a job search, but there's definitely a more effective way to go through the process. So I would say step back. I know everybody's really sort of desperate and frustrated and impatient and scared when they're looking for a job, but step back and start at the beginning of the process, which is your documentation, because that really is going to be your foundation, and that is going to help you either be really successful or it's going to hold you back from being really successful. So when I talk about documentation, I talk about a master application, which is just a master answer to all those questions you're going to have to answer over and over and over again. So having that where you can just cut and paste and easily customize it is really helpful. Then having a resume, an updated resume. Then having a portfolio. I work specifically with job search portfolios, which are just electronic ways of sending information to agencies and families. And it does have a different selling bit that we'll get into a little bit here. But having a portfolio. So having your documentation order will help you so much. It will not only serve as screening tools, so you're being matched with the right families. Even if you're doing a self-search, you're still going to do your own matching, right? But it will also help to sell you. So the documentation is the first step. And that your goal in that really is to bring out those selling points and also to use it as a screening tool. And then you're going to go through all the different venues. Again, you should use an agency if you have a good one in your area. That's always my recommendation. I love good agencies. They will make your life so much easier. I can't even tell you. So use a good agency if you're lucky enough to have one in your area. But there's lots of other ways. People go to Care, Urban City. Facebook groups are now huge. LinkedIn, Nextdoor. There's tons of ways to look for a job. And that documentation that you've put work into, now you can zip through all those things because you're ready. You don't have to sit there at the end of the evening for 4 hours filling out all this stuff. And then you're going to go through an initial interview, which is like the phone interview, right? And that is where your goal really is to screen, to make sure this family is offering what you're looking for, not just in pay, but in benefits and also work environment. Are they a family you want to work for? So it's a short initial interview, but it's really important. It gets rid of all those families that just aren't going to be a good match. And then once you have that connection, you can go on to what used to be the face-to-face interview. And now it's a FaceTime or Zoom interview. And that is a much longer interview where you're really going to dig in. You're really going to find out who they are, and they're going to find out who you are. And the goal there is to sell yourself, but to also make sure they're a family you want to work for. So it really is a process that you can go through. And if you go through the whole process step by step, it's sort of like in mediation, we say, go slow to go fast. So put the work in ahead of time and you're going to get to the end much quicker and you're going to be a lot more successful. So that's the process that I always recommend.
Fantastic. So I want to talk about interviewing, but before I get into that, I have a question for you.
Yes.
Based on a trend I'm starting to see, and I don't know if you have thoughts around this or not, but what do you think about nannies setting up, even if it's just one page, setting up a website with some of their features and their information? Do you think there's value in that when they're in the job search?
I absolutely think any way that you can get your information out, if it's well put together, again, your documentation can hurt you. So if you don't take the time to really put it together well and make it professional looking, but also make it professionally content driven. It's not just about, and we'll get into feature versus benefit, but it's not just about slapping your resume up on a website. That's not going to do you any good. You really have to put thought behind it. But if you are really intentional and professional and put a lot of time and energy into making it great, absolutely. The more you can get your information out to people, I'm all about throwing the broad net. That's why I have a lot of vetting in my process. It's like throw it out there, let everybody see it, and just vet really strongly so when you get to the end, you're not wasting your time. But I love the website idea.
Yeah, I think I love that tip of really using that vetting process to narrow it down. That's a great suggestion. I mean, what I tell people is if you're going to, my opinion on it is if you're going to put a website up there, I love that you said this because it's key. Your documentation can hurt you. So if you're going to do it with excellence. And I tell them, use that to tell your story.
Exactly.
Because that becomes part of the vetting process. People who hear your story and resonate with it are going to be naturally drawn to you and oftentimes are a better fit for you than somebody who might look good on paper but isn't really
right. Yeah, because when you're interviewing, when people are hiring you, they're hiring you as a caregiver and you as a person. So you have to cover both of those bases.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk a little bit. What do you tell people? What do you suggest for really having a successful interview? What are the things they need to do to set themselves up for success?
So the biggest thing, again, is learning your documentation, because you're not going to have it sitting there in front of you. So you need to know, I always tell people, have your top 5 to 7 selling points and have those ready in hand, in your mind. And this requires practice, 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 and then more practice. So get a friend who is going to help you with a mock interview, or sit in front of your video camera and pretend you're answering questions, and then watch how you come across through the video. So honestly, it really is practice, and it really is around selling yourself. That is the most important piece. And also asking good questions, good open-ended questions, so you learn about the family. So if you're sitting there with a list, there's nothing wrong with bringing in a list of questions, but the interview needs to be a conversation. It is not, I'm going to ask you a question, you're going to ask me a question. That isn't how it works. It needs to move into the conversation realm, which means you need to be very comfortable with the questions you're asking, and you need to be very comfortable with the information that you're providing, and be ready to change it on the fly. If a family asks you a question that you're not prepared for, or you understand suddenly that they have a need that you didn't think they did, you need to know the information, your documentation information, enough to where you can answer that question in a conversational way. So really get that. Practice, 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 and then work on your confidence. I think that's the other big thing. All of this, going into job search, it's not people are great or people are horrible at it. It's people have developed skills and people have not developed skills. All of this is communication, and all of this is something that you can develop. So if you are not feeling confident about a certain thing, figure out why and then practice it. Get better at it. So I think those are the two big things. If I can have a nanny come in, I do a lot of coaching. If she's confident, or even if she's not confident, if she knows her material, she will get confident by the end of that, knowing the material. And then you're going in at a much better place. And then finally, just be yourself. Do not try to present yourself as anything that you are not. If they want to hire you, the real you, is going to show up in their door the first day. So you do not want to present somebody separate in an interview and then come to the job as a different person. So be yourself.
Yeah.
The best version of yourself, but still yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I tell people all the time, I hate role playing. I absolutely hate it.
Everybody
But it
does.
does not change the fact that it works.
Yes.
And I love that you suggest that they get on video and practice. I tell my students that all the time. And I tell them, look, it's not easy. I get that. When I first started doing things on video, and I'm a pretty confident person, but that doesn't change the fact when I first started doing things on camera, I had to have a live human on the other side of the camera. And then I got to where I could do it with a cartoon figure up there. And then I just had a little yellow sticky note that said, look here, stupid, so that I knew where the camera was
right,
when I was doing something. Now I'm like, whatever, green dots on, let's go. And that comes, as you said, with practice, practice, practice. So fabulous advice. I love that. And I got to say, your statement about you're the one who's going to show up on their doorstep, the real you, that's gold. I mean, that is just one of those huge takeaways, because so many people, they want to put their best foot forward, but sometimes they go too far and don't present who they really are. So that's fantastic. So as far as how employers see you in the position, you mentioned something a minute ago, and I would love for you to kind of talk about that a little bit. You said something about we're going to discuss the features versus the benefits. Talk to us about that.
So this is my favorite thing. It's a great way to unpack how employers look at you. So employers are hiring from their heart. Even the toughest, most corporate employer, they're hiring from their heart because it's their kids, right? You can be Mr. Tough Guy in the office, but when you come home and your 3-year-old comes up and hugs your leg, you're daddy. So they're in an emotional space. But this is true for all selling. So there's feature versus benefit. And I talk about it like this because nannies get very hung up on features. So features are the things that are on your resume. I have an early education degree. I have 10 years of experience. I have an international passport and ready to travel. So those are the things that are listed on your resume. And those are great. People look at those, employers look at those and go, wow, I really love this resume. She's an impressive person. But that doesn't get them to the hiring emotional place. So what you have to do is you have to turn that feature into a benefit. So you have a degree. That's great. Why is that important to that family? Because for different families, it's going to be different. Do they see it as a point of maturity? So maybe that's what's really important to them. Do they see it as a point of, okay, she's going to be able to travel well with us and interact with our social circle? Is that important to them? So part of this is assessing the family's needs, but part of this is really understanding that whatever your feature is, that's not what's really important to that family. They need to know what the benefit is. And this is how other nannies that don't maybe have the features that you have leapfrog over you and get those jobs. And we all hear these stories and it drives nannies crazy. So talk about that. So if you have a degree, talk about why that's really important to you. Does it really reflect your love of learning? Does it reflect your mindset in the sense of, I went and you know what, it was important for me to get this degree because it was important for my parents. I believe that people should always be learning, should be bettering themselves, whatever your reason is. So talk about all of that. So 10 years experience. I get so many nannies that say, I should be making more money or I should have gotten this job because I have 10, 15 years of experience. What does that mean to the family? Does it mean that you are going to be able to adapt to a lot more different, you're going to be really flexible and you're going to be able to adapt to a lot of different situations very quickly? Does it mean that you've worked with a plethora of different kids? And so whatever's thrown at you in this job, whether it be special needs, a behavior disorder, or a kid that's shy, having difficult with transitions, potty training, whatever, that you know what? You've probably dealt with it. And you're going to be able to go in and help those parents get through that time. That's not something a nanny with 3 years experience can say. So figure out what the benefit is to that family and really personalize it. So if you are a really supportive nanny, talk to that new mom about how you're going to stay and connect with her when she goes back to work. Understand that she has fears and she's scared and she doesn't know what's going to happen. And she needs somebody at home to connect with her, to support her, and to make sure that, to reassure her, even if you're not a person who checks in every day, that you're going to be checking in before you go out for a walk or when the baby goes down for a nap, because that's what she needs in that moment to be able to move past what she's dealing with. So talk very specifically about what the family needs. And it really does change the dynamic because it really talks to, it paints, I say, paint a picture. It's almost like a visualization for the family. We've all done visualizations where we closed our eyes and we walked through something and we've seen it in our mind and the emotions have come up as we've gone through that. That's what you want to do for that family. You want to paint a picture for them around what life is going to be like when you are their nanny. And that picture should be as hallmarky as possible. There is no such thing as too much sap when it comes to parents about their kids. And even person, but let me tell you, when I'm talking to parents about their kids, I am all sap. And that always surprises people when they hear that, especially my friends outside of childcare. But that's really in my heart. That's where it comes from. And so parents really pick up on that. So take all of your features, literally every single one of them, and turn them into benefits. And know that they may be different for different families. So it may be a benefit for every family, but the actual benefit may be different from family to family. So again, knowing that going in, knowing that information about yourself and being able to adapt it in the interview is going to be what's really, really important.
Yeah, I think that's such good advice. And I know that in my career, I've worked with lots of multiples. And one of the things that's on my resumes is that I'm structured and organized.
Mm-hmm.
And what that does, especially first time parents, is helps reassure them. I take that feature and I talk about the fact that the benefit to their family is that because I'm structured and organized, their house is not going to be as chaotic as they are imagining with multiple toddlers running around. Because I structure their day, I structure what goes on, everything is neat and organized, everything has a place, and that makes it much easier to deal with the things that are more challenging when you have multiples.
Mm-hmm.
And they love that aspect of things. I also have worked for a family, not for myself, but for the nanny that they were looking for. They wanted somebody who had piano skills or another classical musical instrument. And I was a little confused by that. I said, are you expecting them to teach your child musical skills? And they said, no, that's an indication of how their brains work, because
Exactly.
music and math to them are equivalent. And we want our children, they were having girls, and they said, we want our daughters to grow up with a strong math and science background. So we want somebody who has musical skills, because that's a part of the brain that's developed, and that's how they're going to interact with our kids. I was like, okay. It was a new one for me, but nevertheless.
Well, and knowing, let me just say, knowing those things and understanding what the family wants as far as the benefit can help you if you don't have the feature. Mm-hmm. So if, say, you weren't classically trained in piano, but you really, really wanted that job, you know, do some research and find out what other connections. Art is another thing. So maybe you're not musical, but maybe you're really artistic. So maybe you can go in and talk about how important that is for you and how you translate that into connections around STEM, you know, STEM integration. So the families are getting their needs met, even though you don't have specifically what they're looking for. I see it all the time. Families will say, I want somebody with this. And that they want that this for a very specific reason in their head. And so if you can go in and show them a workaround that's real, that you're really able to provide, then you can get positions that technically you're not qualified for, or on first glance you weren't qualified for.
Yeah, that's a great tip. I love that. So when we're looking at this, obviously a big part of this, and a big part of the focus of what you do as well, is contracts. And I oftentimes talk to people who are like, well, I started my job and they don't even have their contract. Where in the process is contract negotiation? Is this part of the interview? Is that when they should be discussing this? When do you suggest to people to look at this?
So if you've waited to talk about contracts in negotiation at the end, you're too late. You can still make it up. You can still always course correct, but you're too late. So in the very, very beginning, you should talk about what you must have. So if you absolutely need guaranteed hours equal to your regular schedule, that should be in your, when I talked about the portfolio early on, I have a job wanted sheet. And so you list that. So the family should know going in what you're looking for. You don't need to go into a lot of detail. You don't need to present them with a sample contract, none of that stuff. But you need to list it, just like the family's going to list what they need for you, right? So you need to give them a heads up, because that's part of the vetting process. You do not want to find out when you get to the very end of this that, oh, that's not something they're willing to provide. So you need to provide that information at the very, very beginning. But the selling part, the negotiation part, happens during the interview. So if you vetted correctly, you're talking to a family that can afford you. That's a key point. And that can provide you the benefits that you're looking for. So we're going to assume those things. So when you get to the end and you're actually talking about dollar amounts and benefits and how those are going to work, if you've done the interviewing correctly, they love you. They already have a picture in their head of how you're going to swoop in and how their life is going to be with your nanny, with them, with you as their nanny. They're thinking about all the fun things their kids are going to do and how this transition is going to be so much easier than they thought. They're going through all of these things already in their head if you've done a good job in your interview. So when you say, well, my price range was $25 to $28 an hour, looking at this position, 28 seems fair to me. They're going to be on board with you because they already love you. If you haven't done a great job during interviewing and they're like, she's okay, but we still have other candidates we're looking at, then the 28 is going to be a harder sell, right? They're going to be thinking, well, she has this, but she's missing this. And not that everybody is perfect or completely fills the needs of a family, but it's that emotional connection. If you have that emotional connection within, the negotiation is so much easier because yes, you will have to negotiate. They may make a lower offer. You may make a higher offer, but the connection is there. The conversation is there, and they already want you, which makes it 99% easier for you to get into a fair contract. If you're in contract negotiation and you're suddenly saying, well, this is the reason I'm worth it, you've missed your opportunity. because that's not the place to show why you're worth it. Why you're worth it needs to be highlighted through that interview. So the family knows that going in. They already know you're worth it. They already know they want you. Now it's just a matter of nailing down the details in the contract. And too often I hear family or nannies come to me saying, okay, I've gotten through the interview. Now what do I do about my contract issues? Like, oh, you need to back up.
Yeah.
So be really, really aware around the selling piece of that, because that's what you're doing. You are building the foundation for a successful contract. And then at the end, you can actually fill out the contract. I always just fill out the first draft. I'm going to fill out the first draft, including all the things that we've already agreed to. I'm going to send it over to you and we can talk about the rest. Literally, that's the whole conversation for me. It's not long and drawn out. It's 2 sentences. I fill out the contract. I send it over to them. And then we nail down some of the smaller details that go within the big picture. So it can be way easier than people think, but you have to nail the interview.
Yeah. I used to say all the time when I was still nannying, that my goal was they've hired me in their mind by the time I left.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And it generally worked out that way too.
I know. My last job on the East Coast, I was doing a whole bunch of interviews, and literally as I was walking down the steps, Mom closed the door. We said goodbye. I was getting in my car. She opened up the door and ran down the steps and came to my car. She goes, "Would you just stop interviewing if we offered you a bonus right now? Would you just stop?" I was like, "Yes, actually, I would." So I got a hiring bonus for coming on because I already knew when I was walking out. I thought, this is the job. This is the job I want. And so people already have it in their head, and they don't want to let you go. So the interviewing is the place to make that happen.
Yeah, and I've had something similar when I was interviewing. It was actually how I ended up here in Phoenix, and the family I was flying to California to interview. And the family here in Phoenix talked to one of my references. And they called me. I said, I'm leaving for the airport tomorrow to go to California for this interview. I'll contact you when I return. And they called me 15 minutes before I left for the airport. And they said, you haven't left yet, right? And I would say, no. And they said, we talked to your reference last night. Don't take that job until we get the opportunity to interview.
Yep.
And 20 years later, I'm still in Phoenix.
Yeah.
Because I took that job with that family in Phoenix, and it worked out really well. It was sad to leave Seattle, but it worked out well. So we have already talked through what literally are amazing tips, way more than I was hoping that we were going to get tonight. So I'm thrilled to death with what you've shared with us. Is there anything else that you'd like to share kind of as a final takeaway or a final tip with our audience?
I think my final tip, and this is always what I tell nanny clients when I work with them, is your attitude is a huge part of why you are hired. Who you are as a person. It's not just about your years of experience or your educational background or things like that. Your attitude and the way you come off in an interview is a huge part of why agencies will take you on and represent you, and a huge part of why families will hire you. So make sure that shines through. Make sure, your positive attitude or your ability to be really flexible or your really true love of travel or your just excitement about working with kids really, really, really shines through. You do not have to talk about how great you are. You can just talk about what you love and what you're committed to and what you're passionate about. But really go in saying, okay, this attitude piece, I call it the secret sauce. This is what is really important. How am I going to let that shine through? And then second tip, because I just rambled. If they have not asked you an important question that you're like, oh, I just can't wait till they ask me this because I can't wait to share this. If they don't ask you, share it anyway. Say, let me tell you a little bit more about my childcare philosophy. And then share that with them. Do not let the opportunity go by to not share information because you were not asked the right question. Just put it in there. If it's important, if it's one of your selling points, make sure you get it out in the interview.
Oh,
so that's my tip.
That's fantastic. Seriously, Lora, I'm just blown away at the amount of information and the great tips that you have shared. It has really been an honor to have you on and to get to learn from you tonight. So thank you so much for all of this.
Well, thanks for having me. This was fun. I love talking about this stuff.
Yeah, yeah, I do too. And I love providing more opportunities for our community to learn. So
Yeah.
really appreciate it. So thank you
Awesome.
to all of you for joining us tonight. If you have questions around this topic or anything related to job searching, contracts, or anything else that Laura might be able to help you with, put them in the feed and tag Laura or tag Newborn Care Solutions. And we'll make sure that Laura gets those questions and you get answers. And if you
Absolutely.
are wanting to rewatch this segment or catch any of our past Real Talk episodes, along with accessing our other content, hop over to newborncaresolutions.com and click on the education tab. And you can now find all of our resources on YouTube as well. Just search Newborn Care Solutions. Thanks for joining us and have a fantastic night.